Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Shabbat. We're up to Perek Bet Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnah should be Le'ilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev, Neliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. Today's Mishnah is going to continue to discuss the topic of wicks that are disqualified from use in Shabbat lamps. Kol hayotze min ha'etz en madlikin bo ela pishtan. We may not kindle Shabbat lights with a wick made of anything that comes from a tree, except a wick of flax, which is permitted. The Mefarshim explain some parts of a tree can be crushed, spun, and made into wicks. Such wicks do not absorb oil easily, and their flame flickers, which disqualifies them from use in Shabbat lights. However, wicks made from combed flax or linen cloth, which is made of flax, may be used for this purpose, because the flame they produce is steady, as the Rambam writes in Ilchot Shabbat, chapter 5, halacha 5. But wicks made from uncombed flax are disqualified, like we taught in Mishnah 1. Now, although flax does not grow on a tree, the Rav explains that it is described as such in Sefer Yoshua, chapter 2, pasuk 6, Pishtei ha'etz, the flax of the tree. So the Tana therefore felt it necessary to teach that flax is excluded from his general statement about the products of a tree. The Mishnah now is going to add another halachic difference between most tree products and flax. V'chol hayotze min ha'etz eno mitamet tumat ohalim ela fishtan. And a roof that is made of anything that comes from a tree does not become tameh with 10 tumah when a corpse is beneath it, except for a roof made of flax. The Mefarshim explain when a person or utensil is in the same tent, meaning under the same roof as a corpse, that person or object becomes tameh. This form of tumah is known as tumat ohalim, 10 tumah, as the Torah describes in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 19, pasuk 14. Furthermore, the roof itself can become tameh, if you see there in pasuk 18. So the Mishnah teaches that there is a difference between flax and wood in this regard. If the roof is made of flax, it indeed becomes tameh, but one made of wood does not become tameh, even though it spreads tumah to people and items beneath it. Now, this distinction is derived from the materials used for the Mishkan. The Torah uses the word ohel, tent or covering, in connection with tent tumah, and also in connection with the coverings of the Mishkan, thereby linking the two subjects. So the Rav explains the only product of a tree contained in the Mishkan's covering was flax, linen. So therefore, only a roof of flax can become tameh, whereas a roof of wood cannot. Now the Mishnah discusses whether a wick made from cloth or a particular size is fit for use in Shabbat lights. The Torah states that a beged, a garment, can become tameh in Sefer Vaikra, chapter 11, pasuk 32. The word beged literally means garment, but in this context, it includes any piece of cloth that is large enough to be useful. The smallest cloth that meets this requirement measures 3 by 3 etzba'ot, finger breadths, because it can be used as a patch. So the Mishnah's case is of a wick formed by twisting a cloth that measures exactly 3 by 3 etzba'ot, finger breadths. Pitilata beged shekipelah v'lo hivhava. The following dispute now concerns a wick made of a minimally sized beged, exactly 3 by 3 finger breadths, that one had twisted into a wick but had not singed, which the Rav explains the tip of a new wick is typically singed to make the wick easier to light, but this was not done to the wick discussed in our Mishnah. Now the Mishnah must be referring to a wick that was twisted into shape before Yom Tov, because it is forbidden to do so on Yom Tov. Rabbi Eliezer says Time'ah. Since it was merely twisted and not singed, it is still a beged and can become tameh, because Rabbi Eliezer holds that twisting the cloth does not cause it to lose its status as a beged, rather to become a non-beged, it must be singed as well, and therefore it remains susceptible to tumah. So Rabbi Eliezer omer time'ah ven malikin ba, and therefore when Friday is a Yom Tov, we may not kindle a Shabbat lamp with it. The reason for this isur, this prohibition, is that as soon as the wick is set alight, it becomes slightly smaller than 3 by 3 finger breadths, and therefore changes from a beged into a non-beged. Since it changed from one halachic entity into another, it falls under the category of nolad, a newborn item, which is muktzeh and may not be used on Yom Tov. Once it is muktzeh, one may not continue to hold the flame to it as required when lighting a Shabbat lamp. Therefore, such a wick may not be used in a Shabbat lamp on Yom Tov. And the Mefarshim explain, anything that came into existence on Shabbat or Yom Tov may not be used or even moved that day because it is muktzeh under the category of nolad, literally born. For example, if a utensil broke on Shabbat or Yom Tov, the pieces are nolad, because the broken pieces of a utensil are considered new objects that did not exist before. So similarly, in our case, where the wick is a beged that measures exactly 3 by 3 finger breadths, it loses its status as a beged when it starts to burn, since at that moment it becomes smaller than the minimum size of a beged. It's then viewed as a new object that did not exist before. If this change took place on a Shabbat or Yom Tov, the wick would be prohibited under the laws of Nolad. So using such a wick in a Shabbat lamp is problematic, because the the law is that when kindling a Shabbat lamp, it's not enough to merely set the wick alight. Rather, one must continue to hold the flame to the wick until most of the wick above the surface of the oil has caught fire, as the Gemara says in Masechet Shabbat, page 28b. However, in the previous case where the wick becomes nolad as soon as it's lit, one would be forbidden to continue holding the flame to it. So for this reason, when Friday is a Yom Tov and the prohibition of nolad applies, Eliezer forbids using such a wick in a Shabbat lamp. Rabbi Akiva says, Tehora umadlikin ba. It is tahor, meaning it cannot become tameh because it stopped being a beged as soon as it was twisted into a wick. The Rav explains, Rabbi Akiva holds, he maintains that when a piece of cloth is twisted into a wick, the cloth loses its status as a beged even without being singed. Since it's no longer a beged, it cannot become tameh, and therefore madikin ba, we may therefore kindle Shabbat lights with it even on a Friday that is a Yom Tov, because since it had already ceased to be a beged before it was lit, its halachic status does not change upon being kindled, and it therefore does not become muktzeh at that point and may continue to be used on Yom Tov, because according to Rabbi Akiva, the cloth was no longer a beged before Yom Tov when it was twisted into a wick. Since it was already a non-beged when Yom Tov began, it does not change its status and become nolad upon being lit, and therefore there's no prohibition against using on Yom Tov for a Shabbat lamp. And the Rav writes, Ve'alacha ki Rabbi Akiva, the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva. And that is the end of Mishnah Gimel. We continue now with Mishnah Daled. We know extinguishing a fire is one of the 39 melachot we will see in the Mishnayot, chapter 7, Mishnah 2, Melacha 36. One who removes oil from a lit lamp on Shabbat is guilty of performing this melacha, even though he did not directly put out the flame, because he made the flame go out sooner than it would have otherwise, as the Rosh writes in his commentary to Masechet Betzah, Siman 2, number 17. So to prevent people from removing oil from a lamp and desecrating Shabbat, the rabbis prohibited using certain types of lamps on Shabbat. And that's what we will explain in this Mishnah. Lo yikov adam shefoferet shel betzah v'mal'ena shemen v'itenena al pi haner b'shvil shetem menatefet. A person may not make a hole in an empty eggshell, fill it with oil, and place it on the mouth of the lamp so that the oil and the eggshell will drip into the lamp and fuel the flame. And if you could see the image provided by the Arts Elucidated or the Masechet Shabbat Mishnayot Elucidated, they have special editions of Mishnayot Elucidated. If you look at the picture, it'll help understand. But just to explain, lamps in those times typically consisted of a covered bowl with a short tube at one end through which the wick extended. Oil was poured into the lamp through a hole, literally the mouth in the top. So in the Mishnah's case, an eggshell was placed in the hole to serve as a reservoir from which oil would drip into the lamp. The rabbis forbade this arrangement because they were concerned that one might remove some oil from the eggshell. Now, since this oil was in the process of being used to fuel the flame, removing it is biblically forbidden under the melacha of extinguishing because it causes the flame to go out sooner. Now, this concern applies only with respect to oil that is in a separate reservoir and not in the lamp itself. Since the oil is in a different container than the lit wick, people might mistakenly assume that taking it is not considered an act of extinguishing. As for the oil in the lamp itself, there is little risk that a person will take it because it's common knowledge that doing so is forbidden. Therefore, if a lamp does not have a reservoir and all its oil is in the bowl of the lamp itself, the rabbis did not ban its use on Shabbat. Here we're talking about we have a reservoir, the empty eggshell. Afilu hi shel cheres, the Mishnah says such a lamp is forbidden, not only if the reservoir of oil is in an eggshell, but even if it's made of earthenware. Now, although an earthenware container is not clean, and oil that has been in it is not fit for use with food, there is still a concern that one might remove some of it. Now, although one would not take this fuel to use with food, which besides fuel is the main use of oil, one might take it for its other needs, as the Meiri explains. Rabbi Yehuda matir, but Rabbi Yehuda permits using a lamp with a separate reservoir, whether it's made of an eggshell or earthenware, because in his opinion, people are unlikely to remove oil from it, and there was no need for a rabbinic law to prevent them from doing so. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, he reasons that since the oil is clearly dripping from the reservoir into the lamp, people will realize that the oil fuels the lamp, and that it may not be taken. However, if the craftsman who made the lamp attached the reservoir to the bowl when he first made it, or if the owner attached it before Shabbat in a professional manner that resembles the work of a craftsman, as the Gemara writes on page 29b in Masechet Shabbat, everyone agrees that is permitted to be used. Again, if the craftsman who made the lamp attached the reservoir to the bowl where he first made it, or if the owner did it in a professional craftsman manner, everyone agrees that it's permitted to be used, because in that case it is all one vessel, meaning the reservoir is part of the lamp. So in this situation, a person would certainly realize that the oil is meant for the lamp and may not be removed, and therefore it was not necessary to ban a lamp of this type. ולא ימלא אדם את הקערה שמן ויתננה בצד הנר ויתן ראש הפיתילה בתוכה בשביל שתהיה שואבת. A person may not fill a bowl with oil, place it beside a lamp, and place the unlit end of the wick into it so that the wick will draw oil from the bowl into the lamp. Again, if you could see the diagram, it'll help. The unlit end of the wick is drawn through the opening in the lamp's cover and placed in a separate bowl of oil. Here too, the rabbis were concerned that one might remove oil from the bowl and thereby perform the melacha of extinguishing the Rabbi Yehuda matir, but Rabbi Yehuda permits this arrangement as well, because like we explained above, he does not consider it likely that a person will remove any oil. The Mefarshim explain, unlike the reservoir of eggshell or earthenware, which sits directly in the opening of the lamp, the bowl is separate from the lamp, but nevertheless, according to Rabbi Yehuda, people will realize that the oil in the bowl is fueling the lamp, and they will not remove any of it. And as the Rav concludes, he tells us, "V'lecha kechachamim," the Halacha follows the opinion of the sages. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.